Welcome back to the channel. So today I have a real good treat for anybody who's never read this before. I have a collection of essays and lectures. There's really only a handful, maybe 4 or 5. And I wanted to read them to people so that you can hear it, because these aren't the easiest things to find, and I want to do this for the sake of education, commentary, and really the embetterment of mankind. That is actually why I am reading this today, and anything from Michael Crichton, including excerpts from his novels. I want you to know I read this to help embetter mankind for a better, more peaceful, productive, and good, happy future for our species. I'm going to start with this one because I think that this is the most important essay that's ever been written in modern times. This is one of the most important essays ever written, period. Ever. In the history of our species, this is one of the most important essays ever. And funny story about this, they wanted us to bring in different essays and things that related to a story we're reading in college. I brought this in, I passed it, I gave it to them, and no one wanted to read it. People read the title, and then they just left it at their desks. Like I was completely, like I was just so bad for even bringing this in. And I don't even think anybody actually read it. Somebody took it with them, dumped it in the trash. People just, whatever, okay. I don't know if they read Michael Crichton and thought, oh, we can't read him, or this was circa 2010, 2011, when this happened to me, but, Anyway, I felt compelled to pass this around as something that related to our work. Maybe I was just getting ahead of myself, or maybe not. So this is the most important thing that I could start with in terms of Crichton's lectures and essays. Okay, things outside of his novels. I think everybody in high school, junior college, and then your bachelor's degree and your master's and your doctorate, at every stage, you should have to write an essay about this. And then you should have to bring your previous work, your previous essay, show it to your current teacher at whatever stage you're in, and then expand on some point or history of what this essay has laid out. And I think that should be mandatory in every university in this country, every school, starting with high school. Obviously not each year, but each stage of schooling, you are to turn this in to whichever teacher is appointed to do this. You have to do it to graduate anywhere. I know that's incredibly biased, but I think if anything were to be implemented in a scenario like that, it would be this particular essay. It is that important. So let's begin. Why Politicized Science is Dangerous? By Michael Crichton. Imagine that there is a new scientific theory that warns of an impending crisis and points to a way out. This theory quickly draws support from leading scientists, politicians, and celebrities around the world. Research is funded by distinguished philanthropies and carried out at prestigious universities. The crisis is reported frequently in the media. The science is taught in college and high school classrooms. I don't mean global warming. I'm talking about another theory which rose to prominence a century ago. Its supporters included Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, and Winston Churchill. It was approved by Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes and Louis Brandeis, who ruled in its favor. The famous names who supported it included Alexander Graham Bell, inventor of the telephone, activist Margaret Sanger, botanist Luther Burbank, Leland Stanford, founder of Stanford University, the novelist H.G. Wells, the playwright George Bernard Shaw, and hundreds of others. Nobel Prize winners gave support. Research was backed by the Carnegie and Rockefeller Foundations. The Cold Springs Harbor Institute was built to carry out this research, but important work was also done at Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Stanford, and Johns Hopkins. Legislation to address the crisis was passed in states from New York to California. These efforts had the support of the National Academy of Sciences, the American Medical Association, and the National Research Council. It was said that if Jesus were alive, he would have supported this effort. All in all, the research, legislation, and molding of public opinion surrounding the theory went on for almost half a century. Those who opposed the theory were shouted down and called reactionary, blind to reality, or just plain ignorant. But in hindsight, what is surprising is that so few people objected. Today, we know that this famous theory that gained so much support was actually pseudoscience. The crisis it claimed was non-existent, and the actions taken in the name of theory were morally and criminally wrong. Ultimately, they led to the deaths of millions of people. The theory was eugenics, and its history is so dreadful, and to those who were caught up in it so embarrassing, that it is now rarely discussed. But it is a story that should be well known to every citizen so that its horrors are not repeated. The theory of eugenics postulated a crisis of the gene pool leading to the deterioration of the human race. The best human beings were not breeding as rapidly as the inferior ones. The foreigners, immigrants, Jews, degenerates, the unfit, the feeble-minded. Francis Galton, a respected British scientist, first speculated about this area. His ideas were taken far beyond anything he intended. They were adopted by science-minded Americans, as well as those who had no interest in science, but who were worried about the immigration of inferior races early in the 20th century. Dangerous human pests who represented the rising tide of imbeciles and who were polluting the best of the human race. The eugenicists and the immigrationists joined forces to put a stop to this. The plan was to identify individuals who were feeble-minded. Jews were agreed to be largely feeble-minded, but so were many foreigners as well as blacks, and stop them from breeding by isolation in institutions or by sterilization. As Margaret Sanger said, fostering the good for nothing at the expense of the good is an extreme cruelty. There is not greater curse to posterity than that of bequeathing them an increasing population of imbeciles. She spoke of the burden of caring for this dead weight of human waste. Such views were widely shared. H.G. Wells spoke against ill-trained swarms of inferior citizens. Theodore Roosevelt said that society has no business to permit degenerates to reproduce their kind. Luther Burbank stopped permitting criminals and weaklings to reproduce. George Bernard Shaw said that only eugenics could save mankind. There was overt racism in this movement, exemplified by texts such as The Rising Tide of Color Against White World Supremacy by American author Lothrop Stoddard. But at the time, racism was considered an unremarkable aspect of the effort to attain a marvelous goal, the improvement of humankind in the future. It was this avant-garde notion that attracted the most liberal and progressive minds of a generation. California was one of 29 American states to pass laws allowing sterilization, but it proved the most forward-looking and enthusiastic. More sterilizations were carried out in California than anywhere else in America. Eugenics research was funded by the Carnegie Foundation and later by Rockefeller Foundation. The later was so enthusiastic that even after the center of eugenics effort moved to Germany and involved the gassing of individuals from mental institutions, the Rockefeller Foundation continued to finance German researchers at a very high level. The foundation was quiet about it, but they were still funding research in 1939, only months before the onset of World War II. Since the 1920s, American eugenicists had been jealous because the Germans had taken leadership of the movement away from them. The Germans were admirably progressive. They set up ordinary-looking houses where mental defectives were brought and interviewed one at a time before being led into a back room, which was in fact a gas chamber. There they were gassed with carbon monoxide and their bodies disposed of in a crematorium located on the property. Eventually, this program was expanded into a vast network of concentration camps located near railroad lines, enabling the efficient transport and killing of 10 million undesirables. After World War II, nobody was a eugenicist, and nobody had ever been a eugenicist. Biographers of the celebrated and the powerful did not dwell on the attractions of this philosophy to their subjects, and sometimes did not mention it at all. Eugenics ceased to be a subject for college classrooms, although some argue that its ideas continue to have currency in disguised form. But in retrospect, 3 points stand out. First, despite the construction of Cold Springs Harbor Laboratory, despite the efforts of universities and pleadings of lawyers, there was no scientific basis for eugenics. In fact, nobody at that time knew what a gene really was. The movement was able to proceed because it employed vague terms never rigorously defined. Feeble-mindedness could mean anything from poverty to illiteracy to epilepsy. Similarly, there was no clear definition of degenerate or unfit. Second, the eugenics movement was really a social program masquerading as a scientific one. What drove it was concern about immigration and racism and undesirable people moving into one's neighborhood or country. Once again, vague terminology helped conceal what was really going on. Third, and most distressing, the scientific establishment in both the United States and Germany did not mount any sustained protest. Quite the contrary. In Germany, scientists quickly fell into line with the program. Modern German researchers have gone back to view Nazi documents from the 1930s. They expected to find directives telling scientists what research should be done, but none were necessary. In the words of Uwe Deichmann, scientists, including those who were not members of the Nazi Party, helped to get funding for their work through their modified behavior and direct cooperation with the state. Deichmann speaks of the active role of scientists themselves in regard to Nazi race policy, where research was aimed at confirming the racial doctrine. No external pressure can be documented. German scientists adjusted their research interests to the new policies, and those few who did not adjust disappeared. A second example of politicized science is quite different in character, but it exemplifies the hazard of government ideology controlling the work of science, and of uncritical media promoting false concepts. Trofim Denisovich Lysenko was a self-promoting peasant who, it was said, solved the problem of fertilizing the fields without fertilizers and minerals. In 1928, he claimed to have invented a procedure called vernalization by which seeds were moistened and chilled to enhance the later growth of crops. Lysenko's methods never faced a rigorous test, but his claim that his treated seeds passed on their characteristics to the next generation represented a revival of Lamarckian ideas at a time when the rest of the world was embracing Mendelian genetics. Joseph Stalin was drawn to Lamarckian ideas, which implied a future unbounded by hereditary constraints. He also wanted improved agricultural production. Lysenko promised both, and became the darling of a Soviet media that was on the lookout for stories about clever peasants who had developed revolutionary procedures. Lysenko was portrayed as a genius, and he milked his celebrity for all it was worth. He was especially skillful at denouncing his opponents. He used questionnaires from farmers to prove that vernalization increased crop yields and thus avoided any direct tests. Carried on waves of state-sponsored enthusiasm, his rise was rapid. By 1937, he was a member of the Supreme Soviet. By then, Lysenko and his theories dominated Russian biology. The result was famines that killed millions and purges that sent hundreds of dissenting Soviet scientists to the gulags, or the firing squads. Lysenko was aggressive in attacking genetics, which was finally banned as bourgeois pseudoscience in 1948. There was never any basis for Lysenko's ideas, yet he controlled Soviet research for 30 years. Lysenkoism ended in the 1960s, but Russian biology still has not entirely recovered from that era. Now, we are engaged in a great new theory that once again has drawn the support of politicians, scientists, and celebrities from around the world. Once again, the theory is promoted by major foundations. Once again, the research is carried out at prestigious universities. Once again, legislation is passed and social programs are urged in its name. Once again, critics are few and harshly dealt with. Once again, the measures being urged have little basis in fact or science. Once again, groups with other agendas are hiding behind a movement that appears high-minded. Once again, claims of moral superiority are used to justify extreme actions. Once again, the fact that some people are hurt is shrugged off because an abstract cause is said to be greater than any human consequences. Once again, vague terms like sustainability and generational justice, terms that have no agreed definition, are employed in the service of a new crisis. I am not arguing that global warming is the same as eugenics, but the similarities are not superficial. And I do claim that open and frank discussion of the data and of the issues is being suppressed. Leading scientific journals have taken strong editorial positions on the side of global warming, which I argue they have no business doing. Under the circumstances, any scientist who has doubts understands clearly that they will be wise to mute their expression. One proof of this suppression is the fact that so many of the outspoken critics of global warming are retired professors. These individuals are no longer seeking grants and no longer have to face colleagues whose grant applications and career advancement may be jeopardized by their criticisms. In science, the old men are usually wrong. But in politics, the old men are wise, counsel caution, and in the end are often right. The past history of human belief is a cautionary tale. We have killed thousands of our fellow human beings because we believed they had signed a contract with the devil and had become witches. We still kill more than 1,000 people each year for witchcraft. In my view, there is only one hope for humankind to emerge from what Carl Sagan called the demon-haunted world of our past. That hope is science. But as Alston Chase put it, when the search for truth is confused with political advocacy, the pursuit of knowledge is reduced to the quest for power. That is the danger we now face. And this is why the intermixing of science and politics is a bad combination with a bad history. We must remember the history and be certain that what we present to the world as knowledge is disinterested and honest. Okay, so I'm going to make a second half of this video, and without getting, going way too much into it and getting ultra tedious about it, because I don't think you need to. This is a very brief essay, and every paragraph is another nail. Okay, and everything he mentioned here is so relevant to right now in 2024, more than it was when he wrote it back in 2005. Although it was still relevant then, and it's been relevant ever since the events of these things happened, all of them. I took brief Russian history, and I happened to have a professor who was an old school professor, and it was just like Russian history 101. It was just the basics, but I learned a lot. His class was awesome. And I've got to say that, I'll save the drawn out explanation for another video, but in that class, my professor said, what I want you to do, and he said this on day one, he said, a lot of you are here because you want an education to better your future, or you're here just because you want an education. In any case, you're here to be educated, and someone is paying a lot of money for you to be here, whether it's yourself, whoever. And so I am talking to the people in this classroom who value their education and their time here, and everything that they're putting into this. And if you don't want to recognize that or appreciate it, that's on you. I am speaking to the people here who value the information and value their education and time here. And I am saying the same thing here to the world right now. Because I have a lot to say about this, because I have a very particular point of view on a lot of these things directed at all groups, every group in the world. Okay? There are people on all sides who want to claim that this essay represents their tribal values. Maybe it does on some level, maybe it doesn't. Or if there are people out there who are going to say, no, this is wrong or misinformed. I don't know how many people would say that, but in that classroom, I learned a lot. And he said on day one also, by the time this course is over, I want you to come up with a conclusion, not just a summary or something like a thesis, but specifically a conclusion. I want you to imagine that if you went to a round table full of academics and researchers and reporters, that after examining all angles of this information, you would bring a conclusion of what happened and why it happened. And you are not just summarizing evidence, but you are coming to a well-rounded conclusion of why things happened the way they did. And I will go into this in part 2, where I'm going to go through here just some parts and talk about a few things. And I am really probably going to go into a couple parts here. Namely, there's a lot here, okay? And, you know, there's a lot about Germany and the Jews and a lot of that stuff that I'm going to do more research into and present varying aspects of that. And again, I work a lot. I can't make content all the time, but I think this is important. I'm going to go really into the Lysenkoism a little bit, and also this part where they interviewed this guy, Ute Dijkman, who says that they went looking for directives to scientists who were leading eugenics research to see what commands directed them to do what research. And what they found was there were none. They would hear the narrative and they simply conformed to it without question. Like they knew what the higher ups wanted them to do and they did it automatically. Scary stuff. This, if I could bring you a conclusion here, and I can go more into this later, but government ideology controlling the work of science and of uncritical media promoting false concepts. What he means by uncritical is that they are not addressing the issue. Right now we have media that's criticizing people, but they're also uncritical to, things that oppose their narrative. They simply don't mention it, or they talk down to it or something, or they just don't want to deal with it. So this Lysenkoism, just briefly here, rise was rapid. I think it was in my, does it say it here? I think so. Basically, Crichton mentions this, and there's a video on my channel. If you go to the playlist that's called Crichton, there's one where he speaks at the Independent. It's this organization. And he does even criticize the Independent at the very end for some little time ago. From that lecture, they had written a piece about the end of the world and global warming, and it's going to happen. So even the Independent was guilty of that stuff, and he mentions that at the very end. But he mentions that Chernobyl, this big thing we thought was so, such a devastating event. He says, well, I hate to be gruesome or inconsiderate or whatever. He says, only 54 people died. And I'm pretty sure it was from my Russian history class that right around millions and millions of people died because the ground in Russia, the farm soil, became so unbearable that it literally just blew away. It actually just all up in the air and blew away in the wind in one season. Because no one could grow anything, millions died of starvation. And I would say the problem, the number one problem is this, where he says government ideology trying to control science. I would say government trying to control more and more things. And when it came to the Soviet Union and Russia in that time, the government having too much control and not understanding its own country. Let's be clear, when Karl Marx wrote the communist deal, he was thinking of cities where there was mass production in factories. Factories were a new thing. You could mass produce products. He thought, well, if we just get enough factories and we mass produce, it won't matter anymore. We'll make so many goods. People have so much access to it. It'll be like mixing water into something. Everything will just saturate out. Everybody will have access to goods as much as they need, and monetary classes will just kind of fall and mold together and spread out and equalize. And but he was thinking of cities. He wasn't thinking of agricultural land. So basically what happened is many people who don't know Russian history of any kind think that, when the Russian Revolution happened, all these people ran and they fought and they stormed in the Kremlin and they took it over and threw out the Tsar and said, we're here, we're liberating. That didn't happen. No one actually knew what was going on with the governance at that time. And what happened was eventually, there were, I don't know how many factions of ideologues developing in Russia, but really it was just a matter of coincidence that the Bolsheviks essentially went into the Kremlin. They just went in there to find that the Tsar had long abandoned it. They hadn't had an actual functioning government at all doing anything for a while. I don't know how long. Ragtag band of people just went in there and found absent Tsar, just gone, long abandoned. And I'm not sure of the history before that, because that's where our class started. Really a history of Soviet Russia. The problem was that when the Bolsheviks got in, they realized, okay, we're here. They were essentially the first ones to get there. And so they started governing. And what happened was that they really didn't know how to govern Russia with communism. Communism was their basis of doing everything. And they have a one-system government. Studying their government was a headache. There were so many things coming from top to bottom. It had this weird structure. I understood it when he laid it out, but it took me some time in studying to really understand how it functioned, and I forgot. But it was sort of drawn out, and the problem was they didn't know how to take something that was supposed to apply to cities and apply it to a country that was mostly agricultural. And Russia was not up to speed on a lot of things, and the government was hell-bent on keeping control, so much so that they were willing to drag their country down with them and destroy their country and their own people, even people who were for them. They destroyed anyone and everyone at a moment's notice. And they refused, absolute arrogance and refusal to just study what other people were doing, to compete with the world. Here we have the example that Crichton points out about Lysenkism, which, again, Chernobyl, 54,000 people, 54 people, not 54,000. 54 people died. That sucks, but I wouldn't call that a massive catastrophe, right? And now there's flora and fauna thriving all around that site. But under Lysenkism, millions of people died. And this was because of the government. My conclusion about this and what's going on in the world right now has to do with too much government bloatation and politics trying to get in front of reality and trying to control and bottleneck everything in order to keep power. I think this essay sums it up pretty clearly. This is more of a Homo sapien problem than it is of any one culture. And I'm going to say something now that, this might seem offensive. I am not a eugenicist or a racist or any other ist. I'm going to say this because I like to challenge things, and I even like to play devil's advocate from time to time, but we are facing a crisis right now in our country of immigrants. Now, I'm not going to try to spin this whole essay to fit the narrative of, I think people should be able to come here, but I think we do need protected borders. I don't think just letting people flood into your country is a good idea. But what's going on now isn't the same exact thing as eugenics. The border crisis is an actual problem of numbers of people coming in here undocumented, unchecked. And we don't know the full implications of what that's going to do to our nation. We have seen a lot of negative effects. I don't know how many good effects there are. And I don't think the condition of these people coming in is so much better here than it was where they were. Probably for a lot of people it is, because they are coming from really violent, messed up third world countries, and a lot of places, not all of Mexico, not all of Latin America is totally dangerous, but there are very messed up places in Latin America with cartels where entire villages of like 70 people get massacred at a time. It's really messed up. I don't even like talking about it, but there are criminals coming here and doing very bad things here. And that's not to say these people coming here are imbeciles or degenerates or that they're all human pests, like it says here, or the rising tide of imbeciles. That was a sentiment held by a lot of people, especially politicians, elitist people, celebrities, the elites. There are different measures that are driving our modern issue in the United States here in 2024 with this border crisis. It is political. Our government is supposed to protect our borders, and they're not. That is a crisis. I'm not going to call it a crisis of the degenerate, but the offensive thing I want to say is that when you get, and this crosses all cultures, and I almost don't want to say it because I think some people might just explode or go crazy. They might take what I'm saying way out of context and go keyboard warrior in the comments. But if you look at ghettos, if you look at third world countries or underdeveloped countries, or you look at impoverished areas, a lot of the biggest problem is that, first, people don't have adequate access to resources. And I agree they should, especially with the money our government steals from us all the time. But also, a lack of literacy and education contributes to a lot of very negative, violent behavior in those societies. When people aren't educated, they tend to be very violent and negative and tribal. And so what I'm saying is, when there are too many stupid people in society, I'm not saying degenerate imbeciles or feeble-minded, but uneducated, fucked up people on drugs, or whatever you want to think, And as a disclaimer, I think there are a lot of people who have limited education who do work very hard and contribute to society. But I'm saying, when there are too many stupid, fucked up people, society becomes unbearable to live in. And that's the devil's advocate, because as much as I love Crichton, and he is my intellectual hero, if I have any, it's him. I like to challenge them, because things aren't always the same. What happened here with eugenics, in the last century was a different mechanism, but a lot of the innate Homo sapien problems of tribalism and elitism are here, and they're present in all parts of our culture. The right wing has their elite racists, so do feminists. But a lot of right-wing people aren't for that stuff. They're actually very intelligent, independent-minded, free-thinking people. And there are some people over here who are also independent, free-minded. So what I really want to say is that, yeah, there's a border crisis, but we can't say, trying to protect the borders is eugenics. There might be some people who do it, but everybody takes advantage of a situation. That's the important thing to understand. Like shale rock fracturing, fracking. It is bad for the environment. The Republicans want it, and all this stuff, or, they're going to take advantage of situations for their own gain, regardless of reality. Both sides are going to try to swing an issue their way or that way or whatever to have cultural domination. And so when people are educated and they become more refined individuals and educated, they push themselves to do things more productive, in a more productive way. I'm not saying that letting all these people in here is going to turn our country into a third world. I think it would take a lot more than what's happened now. But what is happening is bad. It's resulted in some terrible things. And it's not the same as eugenics. On another note, there are celebrities right now still promoting climate doom. There are people who are promoting all this stuff, and he says, once again, this is happening. Okay? I think when society becomes critically illiterate and compulsive, it becomes very difficult to live in. And the more educated and literate people are, and the more self-sufficient they are, usually society can get better and have less screwy people. And screwy, I mean from top to bottom, from all classes through everything. I'm not just saying one group of people is better than other. I will say that people who are self-sufficient and are rational and productive, whether they have a high or low level of education, are usually better at solving problems, better at getting along with, than people who are compulsive and ready to just destroy everyone for whatever. And Crichton goes into this a lot more in some other essays. And the next essay I want to read to you, not now, another video, is called, it is his lecture to, I think it's Caltech. Anyway, we'll read that one next. It's longer. It's a lecture, not just an essay like this, but it brings out some points that people forget about. And you see it on a greater scale than just red or blue, left or right. You see it as a special problem with our species, an anthropological perspective, okay? So anyway, I'm going to pause this. And actually, I'm going to end this video, and I'm going to do the next one, which isn't the lecture, but it is from this same book. I think you can find it after this essay. It's in the back of the book, State of Fear. Both this and the next thing I'm going to read, which is the author's message, are found in the back of the book, State of Fear. State of Fear is an okay novel. I was fairly entertained by it. It wasn't like the greatest thing I've ever read from Crichton. I really like Jurassic Park, Sphere, Congo, timeline's really good too. Prey is very scary. I'm going to do a video about microbot technology at some point, because this is one of the most terrifying and amazing. This is maybe the most powerful technology humankind has ever come up with. Back when Crichton wrote Jurassic Park, the most powerful thing is bioengineering. Well, maybe it still is or isn't, but something that can forward bioengineering is microbots. And this subject is something I've been passionate about for a while. So I want to at least talk a little bit about it in some video. I haven't read Prey since I was a teenager. I'm 38 years old now. I was probably 15 when I read it. I've only read it once, but I barely remember the premise and events. I'm going to end this here. I'm going to go ahead and just stop this video. It's its own thing. So thank you for sticking along and hearing what I had to say about it. And I hope you take something away from this. And, look into your own research on these subjects. I mean, you can, any portion, any paragraph, you can look into any one of these institutions, universities, people, and probably get a lot of history and research about their involvement in this stuff, or not, and if you can't find anything, that's something to talk about too. Yeah. Thank you for your time, and I hope it was worth your time. And I'll see you next time. Take care.